Hey everybody, welcome to summer seminar number 6. My name's Megan Hayes Golding. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and it's really good to have you here tonight. Speaking of tonight we've got Kelly O'Shea with us, who's going to share about building a class culture with an intentional set of values and beliefs about doing the work of the class. This is actually based, I think, a fair amount on a blog post on Kelly's blog. So once we get going, I'll link it in here that I think would be great reading for you after the fact if you haven't already seen it. And just a couple of notes on structuring the space. Tonight's meeting is recorded, and so I encourage you to send coworkers and whatnot here afterwards, after the fact. I encourage you to use the chat for your questions. And I'll be watching the chat in particular so Kelly can focus on her presentation. And we're going to have a chance to break into small breakout room discussions during the hour. So it might be helpful for you at some point to either have something to write on or, you know, a notes app on your computer will certainly work. There's definitely a little original thought going into tonight. Kelly, I'm going to hand it off to you and let you take the show away. Thanks.
Thanks, Megan. Here we go. So I am going to talk about building class culture. And this is me. I teach at LREI, Little Red Schoolhouse, Elizabeth Irwin High School in Manhattan, New York City. And I teach 10th graders physics. I'm mostly going to think about the 10th graders today. And I teach 11th and 12th grade science also. So first of all, what are my classes going to look like this fall, right? That seems kind of crucial, but do not know. Still waiting on that one. So anyway, this is what I'm focused on, and so this is what I'm going to talk about. Physics is not a collection of concepts. I just always like to have pictures of my students in my presentations because it makes me happy to see them. So physics isn't a collection of concepts, it's something that people do, right? And anything that people do is going to be subject to all the same kinds of things as anything that people do, including systems of oppression and marginalization and all sorts of other things like that. So my focus for the last few years for sure has been on how do I authentically do science while not only not recreating the culture and systems in my classroom that exist in science, but while actively creating an intentional culture that is built by and for everyone. But even further than that, how do I equip students with the tools, skills, desire, responsibility of creating and supporting, or really even expecting or demanding cultural change in science when they leave my class, right? The transfer. How do I get them to also have those same ideas? So class culture is built on values. So the first place might be to think about, what do I value in a science classroom? So through some discussion with other teachers this past year, I came up with a list of things that I value and give you a second to read some of them. But you can see there's a link for all the slides. So when I don't let you read everything on the slide, you can go back and read it if you want to. And also what I believe about learning and learning science. I got kind of caught up on the grammatical distinction between values and beliefs and how they be phrased. So it's a 2.0 version for the activity that I built around this to put those together. Okay, so audience participation part. So now I want to give you a chance to think about, what do you value, and give you 5 minutes to think and write either on paper, a note on your computer, wherever you want, and you'll get to talk about it in a small group after this. about 1 more minute. Okay, so now you can pause and you can keep thinking about it if you want to. But we are going to go to breakout rooms for 10 minutes, and you should say hello to people, turn your camera on if you can, and discuss the values or whatever you want, because you're adults and they can't really force you to do anything, especially once you leave this room.
Hey, Kelly, temporarily, this is going to drop you into breakout room 3. Feel free to stay or not stay. Breakout room 3, sorry, for whatever she chooses if it's not what you wanted. Here we go. All right, to those of you watching this on the recording, I'm going to hit pause. We're going to go to breakout rooms for about 9.5 more minutes. And in just a moment, you're actually going to travel forward through time. Welcome to the future, recording watchers. Folks have been in their breakout rooms for the last 10 minutes, and they've got about 1 minute as they return. I've just got a dialog box that popped up. I'm totally not editing this out of the recording. This is too much fun for y'all to see behind the scenes. So I'm gonna bring them back. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome back. And if anybody else shows up, then we'll welcome them back too. And I'm gonna keep going. So I talked about what I value, and everybody got a chance to talk about what they value in the classroom. But if we're going to talk about culture, then we have to talk about what do my students value in a science classroom, right? And I think some of them value some of those things that I listed when they come into the room, and some of them bring in values that are more of a typical physics or science classroom that's been built on the culture that exists within physics and science. And so in that same activity where I came up with that list, I came up with a list of some values in a typical physics classroom. So I'll give you a second to read. And once again, you can always pull it up because I'm sure I won't give you enough time to read. Okay, so typical values in a typical physics classroom and beliefs in a typical physics classroom. Yeah, only one right way, quicker means smarter, etc. And looking at this list, and then so within some of the other work that I've been doing this summer, had a realization recently that that list of values and beliefs in a typical science classroom really reminds me of something, which is this list of white supremacy culture characteristics, right? Only one right way of doing things, making mistakes is not good, sense of urgency that you have to do as much as possible, objectivity, there's only one right answer to and one right way of doing things, right? All of those kinds of things. And especially this idea of individualism, right? Whereas the values that I want to have in the classroom have a lot to do with collective responsibility and collaboration. The values that people bring in from the culture that exists within physics and science has a lot to do with what the individual can do. So we're back to this question of what do my students value in a science classroom? They come in with a mix of beliefs, right? A mix of those typical ones, some of the ones that I listed based on different experiences that they've had. And they're all at different places from each other. But the question for me is, how do the structures and routines in my classroom either change or reinforce the beliefs and values that my students bring with them? Right now, it feels like everything is pushing us toward individualism and urgency. You may feel as inundated as I feel with like tech, tech, tech. Look at all these tech solutions to all of your problems. Oh, Cuomo may eventually someday announce what we're going to do in New York City. This is what my classroom is going to look like, right? Where students are 6 feet apart, don't share objects, measure all these things out. They're wearing things in front of their faces, or they literally just can't even see each other. All of which is often pushing you toward this idea of what the individual is going to do and what they're going to take away. And I have been trying to keep coming back to this question of how do the structures and routines in my classroom either change or reinforce the beliefs and values that my students bring with them, right? And if the most important thing to me is to get them to adopt those values that I listed at the beginning, then I need to be careful about putting everything in those terms. Because if we choose to reinforce individualism, then what we're saying to our students is when things get difficult, only your own needs matter. And really things are difficult a lot of the time, just extra difficult now. So maybe only your own needs matter all the time. And it's just not what I want the students to take away from being in my class or in my school. Okay, so now what? Here's my message. You can't do everything this year. You can't do everything any year, but you especially can't do everything this year. And you're gonna have to let some things go. It's kind of talking to myself too, right? So what must stay? That's what I got to decide. And I think what must stay are these values that I have for my classroom and that I want my students to adopt and leave my classroom with. So I'm gonna share 3 things I did this spring to sustain and build class culture. I had synchronous Zoom classes, and we'll talk more afterwards about how, everyone's gonna have different constraints in different situations. So these, are just things that I did. One thing that was really important was to keep the same kind of structure that I had in my classroom where students worked in groups. They would make whiteboards and then discuss them with each other, share their work with each other, come to a consensus. And so I started out right away with putting them in breakout rooms and having them work. I use Jamboard, but there's lots of good tech alternatives to all of those things. And then I would bring them all back into the same room to do the discussion, just like we would do in class, and they were really great at it in February. And it was complete silence. So I said, don't worry, children, I will come up with an idea. And so here's the idea that I came up with. They're still working in these groups, but you can see there are gray and blue shapes representing people right now, because half of them were on team 1 and half of them were on team 2. So that when we did the discussion afterwards, team 1, for example, would stay all together in the Zoom, in the main room. And team 2, I would say, set a timer for 30 minutes and leave Zoom and come back in 30 minutes. So I only had half the class, but you can see from all the different shapes that I had people from every group in that room for the discussion. So all the different kinds of ideas that were happening in all those separate discussions were still being represented in the room when they were talking about the work that they had done. And then same for team 2, right? In 30 minutes, they would switch and come back. And they would actually talk. And not only would they actually talk, they actually believed that they talked, as they said in their reflections. And I'm not going to give you enough time to read all of these because I want to make sure you have more time to talk to each other. But this is not all of the responses, but a typical selection of them where they pretty much said that the split classes, team 1 and team 2, were helpful because they would talk. And the comments where they said they didn't like it were usually because it meant that they had to talk more. So part of that was just, I didn't have that idea immediately. And so some people felt settled into not talking. It'll be easier at the start of the year. And then here's a similar question at the end of the year about breakout rooms. And these were, again, some pretty typical responses where they said, that was what felt like the closest thing to real life that I had in any class, right? And you can see person after person pretty much says the same kind of thing. And so that means that culture that we'd spent all that time establishing, they felt that in the breakout rooms, in the group discussions, in the collaboration. Okay, so that was thing 1. Thing 2, surveys. I love surveys all the time, even when there's not a pandemic, but the way that I was using them, you can use it to establish relationship with individual students, but you can also use it to have them reflect about those kinds of values that you have and that you want them to adopt, right? So one of these questions asks them, here are a bunch of different ways of like being smart in science. I don't call it that, but that would be a way that they might think of it, and ask them, what have you gotten better at, and give an example, right? But my favorite question is, now think of the other people you've worked with in the class. What's the strength of one of those people, and give an example, right? And then do that for a second person also. So you can't just do it for your best friend, but you have to think of 2 different people that you worked with in the class. And there's nothing better than reading these responses. These are, you can tell because all the links are different. Every single one of these is for a different student. Almost everyone gets talked about every time I do this. And they really value a lot of different things about what all of their classmates can do, but I'm forcing them in their reflection to reflect about their relationship and the strengths of other people. But even in the 3rd week, so that was the end of the trimester, but even in the 3rd week of being online, I asked them, just give a shout out or appreciation to at least one person. And you can see yet again, just the range of things that they valued, from being fun to work with, to helping them by getting on FaceTime when their audio wasn't working because none of us knew how to use Zoom yet, and getting them back into the classroom. Or so-and-so's pet share was very nice, which brings me to pet share, thing 3. So this was something that I just had this idea and I decided to do it. I had students sign up. I just made a Google Sheets document and I put it in Classroom, and only one person could sign up per day. It was only 1 or 2 minutes at the very beginning of class, so it took nothing really away from the amount of time it was while we were getting started. Only 1 pet share per day. Some students shared plants or stuffed animals, and no one was forced to share. Like, you signed up to do it only if you wanted to. I often use that time to set up the breakout rooms or deal with attendance. It was also the funniest thing that had happened the entire time I've been home, so I have, unfortunately, no photos of any of it because I was too distracted to ever take a screenshot. But once we ran out of 10th graders who wanted to share and we still had more time left of being at home, I just started bringing in special surprise guests, and they would never know if that was going to happen that day or not because it wasn't every day anymore. And so it was always like, get to class on time, because who knows, if you get there a couple minutes late, you probably missed the pet share if it happened that day. Yes, so I wish I had screenshots, but I did not, including of one student shared the chickens that were just right behind his computer. When it was his turn to share, just reach behind and live chicken. So should you do these things that I have just told you about? I don't know. Because these are just examples from my class, and you're gonna have different conditions and constraints, and the way that you're going to interact with your students is gonna be different from what I had this spring, right? But the framework can be the same, right? Where can you make space for choices that align your routines and structures with the values that you want students to develop? And that's the framework I keep trying to come back to as I navigate through all of the email lists of cool new tech that I can use to integrate into every different part of everything. I try not to get buried too much in that and come back to this as my fundamental thing. Okay, so now you get to write again. I'm gonna give you 5 minutes to write and think about what's gonna get in the way of your classroom values this fall. Or if you've already started, what is getting in the way already? And then can you solve for maybe at least some of these problems? And once again, you're gonna go back to those same groups you were in before to talk about this after. And now I will mute myself so that you can write. Okay, maybe 30 more seconds. Okay, so Megan, can we go back to those rooms?
Yes, absolutely. Also 10 minutes.
Yeah, let's say 10 minutes, and then if people have questions or want to talk about things after, then that'll leave us some time.
Perfect. I'm going to reopen the rooms, everybody. Good luck.
Okay, hello. Welcome.
Hello.
So that's it. The next is bonus slides, and I will share them with you really quickly, but I just suggest you go to the link if you want to see anything in more depth. So one is just links of resources and different things that were the basis for some of the things that I put. Here's a screenshot of multiple kids writing on the same Jamboard at the same time, just seeing how that collaboration could work. And then I was going through all my screenshots and found this, which just cracked me up because teaching physics is a weird thing. And all of these comments were on topic, which I just enjoyed. And that's it. That's my last slide. So I can answer people's questions or talk to people or whatever anybody wants. We have like a couple minutes left. Or just stare silently at each other, which I'm cool with too.
I find that wait time on a Zoom call is about triple what it is in person. I was going to say that in my group, we were talking about the challenge of some people who take up more than their fair share of airtime and people who take up less than their fair share of airtime. And we were kind of talking through ways to improve on that, especially online. And Heidi in our group shared the School Reform Initiative, SRI, has some resources in particular on sharing airtime, but I'd love to hear from you, Kelly, about your thoughts on the airtime issue.
Yeah, there are just so many things to think about for this fall because all the ways that I normally am able to deal with that in the classroom, not when I've done a lot of thinking about, to be totally honest yet. Because in the classroom, you can hear all the groups at the same time, or at least I can. And you can see all the groups at the same time at the very least and see what's happening. So I think that, I mean, my first instinct is always just to go meta and have the explicit conversation with students and bringing that up at the beginning of the year, maybe before it's even happening as part of what's going to be challenging to do online. And I think the students usually respect that kind of like honest conversation.
So one of the questions that I would love to pose to you, Kelly, and anyone in the group, I'm still trying to amass fabulous ideas for how to do group work, particularly when you are teaching in the classroom and you have a set of students in the classroom, but you also have a set of students at home zooming in. So I'd love to hear amazing ideas or half-baked ideas.
Yeah, I've obviously not really done that yet. I mean, I did a very tiny bit because when we had our very last classes, we already had a couple of students who weren't coming. They zoomed in and I just had a student in the room, connected them on Zoom, and I didn't do it. I let the students manage it. And one of them even presented their whiteboard. The people in the group just held up the computer and then they talked to the rest of the class from there. But it'll be a little different. Yeah, Megan's got an idea there. But I think a lot of the strategies for teaching online are going to have to be the things that happen in the classroom, because if they can't face each other or talk or be anywhere near each other or write on the same whiteboard, then using the computers or the whatever devices they have is going to still be crucial. But also other people who have ideas, please talk.
Yeah, I would say that the thinking that I'm seeing is put the online kids first in your planning. So if you've got some kids in the room, some kids online, put the online kids first in your planning. The kids in the room can join that without having to plan a whole second thing. One of my colleagues recently said, then why are we on campus? And my answer was exactly, oh shoot, this is recorded. At any rate, my point is like, yeah, maybe we've lowered the quality of what the in-room experience looks like, but I'd rather do that than have those kids online feel like they're a camera stuck in the corner of the room with no attention paid to them. That was just my approach. I think I can edit that out later.
Earlier today I was talking, I think maybe to Chris, about even having kids on Zoom while they're in the classroom, but everyone just mute themselves so they can at least share screens with each other, or unless there's some other easier way to do that, but having that kind of access even without the audio could be helpful.
Thank you.
Probably have one question, time for one more question. All right, well, y'all have been awesome tonight, and I would like to get a big round of applause for Kelly. Can you give it to us visually, or feel free to use the reactions here in Zoom? It is always fabulous. Lots of great ideas tonight. On Twitter, Kelly is Kelly O'Shea, at Kelly O'Shea on Twitter, and look forward to maybe continuing some conversation there. Kelly, did you want to kind of wrap up with any final thoughts?
No, that's it.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stick around for a few minutes if anybody else would like to chat, but thank you so much for coming, and thank you for making Summer Seminar such an amazing series. Y'all are awesome, and I'm sure we'll see you around the internets at some point this fall. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Megan, for organizing all of this.
Yeah, you're welcome.